Hello and welcome to Aspects of Writing. I'm your host, James Kelly. My guests for today's show are Sharon Hart-Green and Russell Holbrook, and my co-host is Janet Corsi. And we're going to be talking about the variations in writing. We have two varied writers here for sure.
Yes.
And we're going to interview the first author is Sharon Hart-Green, and Sharon wrote a book called Come Back for Me. It's a historical novel. She also wrote a book called Not a Simple Story. And Sharon, I'm going to let you tell us a little bit about you. You're calling in today from Toronto, Canada, and you are a PhD, so talk a little bit about your background.
Okay, sure. Happy to do so. Nice to be on your show, James.
Thank you.
Well, my background is mostly academic. I guess I could say that from a very early age, I was torn in two directions, the artistic and the academic. And I really didn't decide which direction to follow until I was probably in my early 20s.
Okay.
I was an actress in the theater when I was a teenager, and I actually was in quite a few productions in Toronto, and I really thought that would be my future, that I would be following an artistic career. But then when I was young, I was also someone who read a lot and was very studious and liked school, and there was that possibility too to follow in that direction. And I came to a kind of fork in the road at a certain point. I guess I was around 19 years old when I had to decide whether I was going to continue in the theater or whether I was going to go to college. And I think it was during that time when I discovered Jewish literature.
Uh-huh.
It happened just almost by accident. I was in a used bookstore and I picked up a copy of a book of short stories by a writer named Shmuel Yosef Agnon, who's a Hebrew writer. It was in translation, and I really had never heard of Israeli writing before, Hebrew writing, and I was a very big reader. I read a lot of Russian literature and French literature at the time, and I didn't know about Jewish literature, and it was like a revelation to me. And after reading that book of short stories, I was so intrigued by it that I decided to go to university, leave the theater,
Wow.
and start to study Judaism. Now, I am Jewish, but I really didn't know much about my background and about the academic study of Judaism. And I began to study, I took courses at the University of Toronto, and I just couldn't get enough of it. And so I ended up going to graduate school and pursuing a master's degree and PhD. I ended up specializing in Hebrew literature. And then I came back, Brandeis is in Boston. I ended up coming back to Toronto and getting a job at the University of Toronto, and I taught Hebrew and Yiddish literature, which is slightly different than Hebrew literature. I taught for many years, but there was something missing. I think it was that artistic drive that I had always felt within me. Wasn't completely satisfied by my academic career. I love teaching and I love public speaking, but somehow creating something myself was something that I always wanted to do, and I felt that I still really hadn't done it. I was teaching writers and their works, but it wasn't anything I created myself. So I started doing some writing of my own, and I found it so fulfilling. And I wrote what I thought was the beginning of a short story, and it was actually the beginning of this novel, Come Back for Me. It took me many years to finish it, and it really wasn't until I took a break from teaching that I was able to finally finish the novel and find a publisher, and the rest is history.
Wow.
Wow. No kidding.
Well,
were you?
We have a little bit of an Yeah. Did you actually, were you raised Jewish? I know you said you're Jewish, but you were. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, I was raised in a fairly traditional home, but I really did not receive that much Jewish education.
Okay.
So I wasn't aware of the depths of knowledge and wisdom and beauty that exists within Judaism and within Jewish literature in particular.
Yeah. Well, my better half is Jewish, so I know a little bit.
You know a little bit.
But I'm
Well,
sure I'm like you. I probably don't know. Unless you study it, you wouldn't know that much. So
yeah, you wouldn't necessarily know that much. So it was really such an eye opener when I started reading the writings of some of these writers like Agnon and others like Isaac Bashevis Singer and many others. So, and that led me to the study of Judaism and into the specialization in Jewish literature.
So come back to me. That's a historical novel. What is that about?
It's actually come back for me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Come back for me. All right.
Come
Sorry.
back. Yeah, a lot of people make that mistake. It's an historical novel, although it's recent history. It's 20th century history. The story is a dual narrative. It's a post-war novel about a young Jewish man. He's a survivor of the Holocaust, and he goes in search of his sister, who is 2 years younger. He's a very young man. He's 14 years old when the war breaks out, and he's Hungarian. Hungary was invaded very late in the war, so when the war ends, he's only 15. His sister would have been 13, and he goes in search of her throughout Europe, and he struggles a great deal and ends up going to Israel in search of her. He has a tip that she might be there, and he falls in love on the ship going over there. And there's another narrative and the story is told in two parts, so that there's a kind of back and forth. It's a dual narrative. The other story is about a young Jewish woman in Toronto, in Canada, in the late 1960s, who undergoes a great deal of grief as a result of the loss of her uncle, with whom she had been very close. She is also from a family of Holocaust survivors, and we don't know how her story is connected to the first story, although there is a connection. And as you read the novel, you start to see all the links that develop.
Ah.
And she ends up becoming involved with a young man, a young musician who's very charismatic, and it takes her away from her family. And she's very confused about her identity. The stories both end in Israel. Israel serves as a kind of unifying force in the life of both of these two individuals. And I won't say anything more because I don't want to give away the plot. But
All right. And you were traditionally published?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right. All right. So we're going to talk to Russell for a few minutes. And Russell,
Okay.
can I read your bio? Do you mind?
No, go ahead.
All right, because I do like it. He sent this to me. Russell Holbrook is a reader, writer, musician, filmmaker, and visual artist. And by the way, I've seen his pictures. I really like them. His short stories have appeared in the anthologies Chunks, Axes of Evil, Floppy Shoes Apocalypse 2 and 3, Dark Love, Mundo Bizarro, The Classics Never Die, and the International Bizarro Horror Weird Fiction Collection Gruesome Grotesque Volumes 1 through 3. His novellas, Joy, Crust, and The Water Babies, as well as his debut novel, Lucy Fur, that's
I love
two
that
words,
title.
have garnered attention from fans and critics within and without the horror and bizarro fiction scenes. And it's interesting, we're going to talk about bizarro fiction because I didn't know a lot about it till we had a guest on a few months ago. Mm-hmm. As a musician, he was the guitarist and co-founder of Tooth and Nail Records, recording artist Joe Christmas, as well as Sit and Spin, Tricky Records, Instrumental, Post Rockers, Choose Your Own Adventure. Those are all the groups, by the way. As a filmmaker, Russell's science bizarro horror short, A Knife of Her Own, was an official selection of the 2011 Atlanta Underground Film Festival. Mm-hmm. He was raised in a moderately strict Southern Baptist home by his well-meaning parents, which should pretty much explain everything. He lives in Mapleton, Georgia. I love that ending. Let me tell you, because we were talking earlier, and I was raised Free Will Baptist, and we were talking about how there is a huge difference between Free Will Baptist and Southern Baptist. And I didn't know that until I moved to Atlanta. I lived in Atlanta 12 years. So, it is interesting how actually our religions can shape us in many ways, and we can actually
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about that a little bit today. And actually, our knowledge of various religions can shape us in many ways.
Yes.
So, Russell, what else can you tell us about you?
Oh, is there anything in particular you'd like to know?
Well, I know you're married. You're married. You have a child, but that's why you're your second marriage, and you have a child by the first wife. And I was really shocked because if you can see him on screen, he does not look as old as he is. He has a son that's 20 or 21.
No way.
I have a son who's 20, and actually, well, he was born when I was 20 years old, and it's not. I have kind of a storied past, or checkered past, I guess you could say.
Okay.
I'm a recovering alcoholic
Okay.
addict, and so my son was born when I was 20, and that was just with an ex-girlfriend who I wasn't with at the time, and it was like a messy situation. And then I did get married when I was like, I think 30 the first time. I'm not really, I can't remember quite.
Yeah. Now, Russell, are you talking close to the mic because you need to back away from the microphone a little bit? We get an echo.
I heard the echo,
Yeah.
and
That's
is that
better.
better?
That's a little better. Yeah.
I can. Okay, sorry about that.
Well, what makes writing interesting. We did a show also on how everyone's past is so different.
Yes.
And it's amazing how things can influence our writing. Even if it's an addiction, and even though you are a recovered alcoholic, that could have played into your writing. It could have helped with, coming up with these strange ideas, in the bizarro fiction genre.
Right.
So it is interesting how our lives are shaped by who we are, how we live, and whatever our addictions might be.
Right.
So it is kind of interesting. Well, how do you feel? You have a PhD here, doctor. So
Yeah.
weigh in on this.
Well, I'm just wondering what bizarro fiction is.
I'm going to let Russell explain bizarro fiction.
I've never heard of it before, I must admit.
All right. What is bizarro fiction?
I guess the general, or the most widely used phrase is that it's the fiction of the weird, and that's pretty open-ended.
It's kind of got a humorous side to it as well.
Yes, and a lot of it tends to be transgressive and, challenge social constructs and things of that nature, and I just think it's a very open-ended genre. There aren't many rules, and it seems like within the genre there's a struggle against conforming to any sort of norm. Although it's not really experimental in nature, it can be, because most bizarro books that I've read tell a linear story, and they're just kind of out in left field. I don't know, like a recent one is called Stacking Doll, and it's about a human man who wants to marry a Russian stacking doll, and
Okay.
And the rule is, or the family tradition is, before a stacking doll can join with a human, the human has to meet and get to know every one of the dolls. And so that's what the story is about. So it's a love story, and it's just like really inventive, and that's the new Constantine the Third book. He's basically the one who spearheaded bizarro as like a genre and a movement. Although I would say that the godfathers of bizarro would probably be I suddenly went blank and can't remember the guy's
That's all right.
name. The guy
okay.
who wrote The Cat's Cradle and Slaughterhouse 5, Kurt Vonnegut.
Oh, Kurt Vonnegut, yes.
Yeah, and William S. Burroughs. And then you have David Lynch, the filmmaker, has been a big influence on the genre. In fact, the biggest bizarro press is called the Razorhead Press, and that's a name of the David Lynch film. Are y'all familiar with David Lynch?
Yes.
A little bit, but not in great detail.
Yeah. But so Bizarro, you could just say, oh, it's just weird stuff, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Well, it sounds somewhat symbolic too. I mean, just the way you describe the story about the Russian dolls, my mind immediately thought about all of the symbolism that's embedded in that. The multiple personalities.
Exactly.
And that it's a very clever way of of exhibiting multi dimensions of love. But that's the literary critic in me. I don't know if it's meant to be interpreted that way, or whether it's just is what it is. That it's just an absurd.
It sounds like but it does sound like there is a lot to what Russell said, and you said as well, that you are looking at, it's just like a human being. We all are multi-dimensional. We all have different personalities. Depends on who we're talking to at the time and how we're presenting ourselves, especially in business. So it kind of does make sense that if you took that doll and you broke it down into its many different chambers, I guess you could say, you're all looking at all those different personalities. That is interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's also about the making a decision to love someone and stay with them. So I think there's also a theme of commitment in that story. And I haven't read it yet. I've only read about it and just read the synopsis. But I'm really excited to read it soon. But a lot of Bizarro, I think from what I can gather, it seems like the authors just get an idea and they write it out, and then it kind of gets analyzed as an afterthought. And and a lot of it is just really fun and goofy too. It just depends. But even in the most fun or goofy stories, there can still be meaning. I mean, I think. So.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like an X-File to me.
People always ask me when I write, when I speak about my novel, when I give talks, I'm inevitably asked, how do you plan it out? Do you structure the plot beforehand, or do you just write? And just something that you said, Russell, sparked that thought that, at least for me, I do not plan it out. I like to see where the story takes me.
Uh-huh.
It's almost an instinctive process as opposed to a planned one. Although I do know that those who write genre fiction, such as detective or mystery stories or that sort of thing, they do have to plan them out. Otherwise, the plots won't make sense. There are so many twists and turns. They have to, make almost a chart beforehand. I don't write that way at all, and I don't think I'd like to, because I like feeling my way through a story and see where it takes me. I like to be surprised.
Well, I'm going to speak for myself, and I write both government espionage, drama, children's stories, science fiction. I have a science fiction coming out May 19th. I have a children's story coming out May 19th, and I have another weird book coming out. But the thing is that when my first book, The Emblem, came out, it was a government espionage. And I kind of did what you said, though. I did not – it was based on a dream, so I really did have the outline there. But I did allow those characters to develop that story.
Yes.
I incorporated things that were never in my dream into that story. For example, when they're going to one of the main characters is going to Savannah, Georgia, to propose to his future fiance or wife, and what happens is along the way she believes in everything being blessed because of, I don't know how much history you know about Georgia, but there's the voodooism
I've been there a number of times, and I have relatives. I actually have relatives who live in Savannah.
I love Savannah.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, when she's there, she wants to have it blessed, and she goes to this soothsayer to have it blessed. That's something I would never have planned or put in an outline. It just happened because I thought, what would she do? What would her personality do? So I've allowed my characters, even when I'm writing something that seems structured, to help develop that story. I don't. Yeah.
I think it's a much more enjoyable form of writing. At least that's how I feel personally. I don't know. Others may disagree. I mean, it is definitely a personal choice. But for me, I enjoy writing in that way. And it's almost like magic when idea pops into your head
Mm-hmm.
that you don't expect, that you're writing, and suddenly there it is.
Yeah.
And you don't know where it came from.
On
That
the-
always is so thrilling.
Absolutely. Now, on the opposite end of that, because of what you were talking about with structure, when I wrote the science fiction, which you would think would not be structured, that is a
Yes.
structured writing. Because it is telling a tale of who we are, where we came from, and why. And so I
Yeah.
had to throw in, science fiction or science fact and science theories, as well as theology into that book. So
Yes.
that one I just couldn't write anything I wanted because I had to keep it as real as possible.
Yes.
Possibilities. So that one
Yeah,
was
you have-
more.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was more structured. So you're right. There are times when you have to be structured, and then there are times when you let the characters guide you.
Now, Morgan
Yeah.
St. James, who's one of our guests and one of our panelists many times, writes mysteries, murder mysteries, and she says she always likes to wait till the very end to find out who did it. She does
Yeah.
not
That's amazing.
pre-plan who the murderer is.
Yeah, she lets the character develop the murderer throughout the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've
Yeah.
never heard that before about a mystery writer, but I guess if it works for her, then
She's good at it. Of course,
Yeah.
hers are comedy murder mysteries.
so
Yeah.
almost tongue in cheek.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. She writes her own, and then she writes with her sister. They write the Silver Sisters
Murder mysteries.
Murder mysteries, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So, Russell, I know you write Bizarro, but so when you write film, how did you get into that? I mean, did you just decide I'm going to write a movie one day, or what happened?
Well, basically, I mean, I've been playing music for a long time, and I was always into film and into fiction as well. And I just wanted to do it. And my cousin out in California is a filmmaker, and he made this independent horror film that I really love. And so I just was like, I want to do that. And so my friend found an old high-8 camera in his mom's attic. And we were neighbors at the time. And he brought the camera over and he was like, look at this. And it was really serendipitous. There was the camera, there was the two of us. And I was like, oh, we have two people and a camera. Let's make something. And the viewfinder didn't work on the camera, so you would just point at it, something, and turn it on. And so we did. That was our method, and we made 10 short films together, and they were all silent because we didn't want to mess with dialogue or anything, and they were just surreal little pieces. And we edited them using the camera and a VCR, and then the last one we made together was A Knife of Her Own, which we actually borrowed I think it was a 3-chip mini DV camera. And this was in 2008, and we just made that. And a friend of ours who worked at the Atlanta Art Institute of Atlanta did the editing for us. She's phenomenal, and that's the one that placed in the film festival. And yeah, I just wanted to do it, and I was writing scripts, and then I wrote a feature. Lucifer was originally a feature film script, and I wanted to make that into an actual film. And then I kind of gave up on that just because of it just takes so much to make a movie, and the further I got along in the process, I was like, my favorite thing is just the writing. And I had even started to write Joy, which was originally going to be another feature, like film script. And then I heard about NaNoWriMo, and are y'all familiar with that?
No, I don't know what that is.
It's like National Novel Writing Month. It's in November.
Right. Yes, I have heard of that. Yes. And you have a certain amount of time, and you have to come up with something.
Right. And so I took Joy, which was already like a 10-page screenplay, and just decided I was going to turn it into a novel. And I think 3 years later, I ended up having a finished novella. But that's how I got into it. Sorry, it was such a long answer, but I just wanted to do it. And also because I felt like a failed musician, and I thought, well, maybe I can be a successful filmmaker. I could have a career at this, and I could quit my
There you
awful
go.
day job. And it's just, I never like went professional with that either. And
All right,
but
so
all of that brought me full circle to my first love, which is writing.
all right, so your novel, I'm just curious, is yours traditionally published or are you self-publishing it?
Well, Lucifer is self-published, and Crust and The Water Babies are both published by small presses, which is basically just self-publishing done by other people. Like, I mean, a small press is just like a couple of people, and all the other guys, they all have day jobs, and they just do it because they love it. And
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm a small press, and then
Yeah.
in addition to that, I interview all the time people who, some of them are traditionally published, but a lot of them are published by the midstream publishers, and then we have a lot of local publishers. They probably have maybe a dozen or more authors under their belt. Pretty good novels, though. I mean, it's amazing what they can do. And I mention this a lot on our show, but I don't know how many people realize it, but Amazon, they out of their top 100 self-published, or I'm sorry, out of their top 100 best-selling authors, 53 are self-published.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
So, self-publishing is really coming into its own. I started out in 1995 with my first self-published novel when you didn't have the internet to fall back on, to sell on, really, not like it is today. And you certainly didn't have digital publishing. You did it the hard way. Right. So, it's come a long ways since, I started. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how different it is, like night and day. So self-publishing, it's really come into its own. And Amanda, we always talk about Amanda Hawking.
Yeah.
And you know who she is. She lives in Michigan. But she used to sell, I think, 8,000 to 9,000 books a month on her own, self-published.
Really?
Yeah.
She set out to make $800 to go to a friend's, a concert.
Concert. Yeah.
She wanted to go to a concert, so she set out to sell $800 worth of books on the internet, and it took off. And within a year, she had made her first million, and within her second year, her second million. And then she was finally picked up by a traditional publisher, and they had her books for 3 years and wasn't able to conduct or sell her in the way that she did. And so she got the rights back to her books, and now she's back to self-publishing again. But she was a success on her own before they ever found her.
Right.
Right. Yes.
So, and Morgan St. James, you had mentioned Morgan. Morgan's been on many times.
Yeah.
And Morgan's that way as well. Morgan was traditionally published. And in her case, it wasn't that she necessarily gave up on traditional publishing. In her case, one of the owners died and they closed the company, and they gave all 200 other authors their rights back.
Yeah.
And so then she thought, what am I going to do? It's really hard to go out there and find a traditional publisher in the first place. And they decided to just self-publish. By then, she was more familiar with the industry. And they've done quite well as a self-published author. Now, she still has traditional published books as well. I don't want to say she doesn't.
Right.
Because she also co-writes with other people. And they are traditionally published. But, she's still very successful as a self-published author as well.
But she's a go-getter. She gets out there and she lets herself be known to everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she's...
She has her own online magazine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, well, so she's very expressive about marketing her own work.
Yeah, she has Writer's Tricks of the Trade. She actually wrote the book Writer's Tricks of the Trade. And then
Really?
And then she also has her own newspaper. It's a quarterly newspaper that's called Writer's Tricks of the Trade.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and she did not start her career until she was in her 60s.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, really. And that was like,
That's awesome.
it's been quite a few years ago. So, she's one of those who never, and she was in interior design most of her life, very successful. But then she just decided, she and her sister decided one day, well, actually, she started writing articles. She's written over 600 articles.
Yeah. She was asked to write an article for the company she was working for.
That's how she got started.
And it just streamed from there.
So you never
Yeah.
know where your inspiration is going to come from.
That's right.
Hers was because someone asked her to write a simple article
Yeah.
Yes.
about interior
And-
design.
Yeah.
Mm.
And you never know where it's going to lead. I mean, if you know her, you would think, in just seeing her, you'd think she's very serious and that she would not write something as comical as she does.
Yeah.
That she would be straight-laced in a real mystery novel. No, that's not Morgan at all.
She's got such a fun side to her.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can't prejudge someone on that. But anyway, yeah, it's kind of interesting how we all get started. I actually started writing when I was in junior high school and didn't realize that's what I wanted to do because teaching was going to be my
Forte.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but I started writing. I wrote a friend of mine and I. We wrote this thing called Transylvania Times, and it was a spoof on Count Dracula, on Frankenstein, on the werewolf, and we made them all, interact. And they were like humorous little cartoons that we drew the comics to, and then we'd print it up ourselves,
Yeah.
and then take it around and put it on the neighbors' doors. And that's how I really started writing.
Yeah.
That was the beginning.
That was really the beginning, and I didn't realize that I wanted to be a writer back then. I was just a kid just doing something goofy. And never took it seriously at all.
No, I never did.
So you never know. And, with you, Russell, I'm sure having been a musician, you definitely have seen different things. Did you write music at all when you were with the groups?
Pardon, say that again? Did I write the music?
Yeah, did
with
you
the
ever
group?
write any songs or anything?
Oh, yes, I did.
Okay.
In Joe Christmas, the singer and I were the primary songwriters, and we usually, each of us sometimes we bring a fully completed song to the group, but usually we just had some pieces, and we would jam on them, and he and I would collaborate and write things together. And we wrote the bulk of both of the albums, but then as a group, we would work on the song structure and, share different ideas and things. But so I did write a lot, and I shared songwriting responsibilities and Choose Your Own Adventure as well. And I've been into writing music since about the 7th grade, since I started to learn to play instruments. And I wrote a lot. And but I started writing fiction in the 2nd grade. That's when I wrote my first poem. And then I fell in love with writing and music right around the same time. My dad bought me a stereo. I was 7 years old, I think, and I had this teacher that encouraged my interest in writing, and I loved the elementary school book fairs. And I did something similar to what you were talking about, James. I used to, especially in high school, I tried to make a zine of poetry and stories, and just to write stuff out and print it on the printer, and then make little backgrounds and paste it on, and then make a painting and write a poem on it, and things like that. And
Well, you're
then,
very artistic. I can see that. I've seen your paintings. You are artistic. You really are.
Well, it's interesting what you say about being encouraged because by teachers, that's such a crucial thing. I had the same experience. I remember when I was in the 9th grade, my English teacher came up to me after school and told me that I have a real talent for writing. And I never really thought about it. And I always liked writing. I wrote poems and little stories from a very young age. But I never really took it that seriously. And when she told me that, it really stayed with me.
Mm-hmm.
I remembered that. And it gave me such a sense of confidence in myself and my abilities that I think is so important when you're that age, that if a teacher centers you out for something particularly noteworthy, it can have a real effect on you later in life. It stays with you.
Yeah.
I had the exact same experience. I had a teacher when I was a junior in high school, and she was retiring. And I remember that summer, after she had retired, she called me to visit her at her house to talk about it. And she was telling me, James, you can really accomplish whatever you want, you know. And because I struggled with English, and she saw that. But she says, you know, don't let that discourage you. You know, keep going with this. Keep doing whatever you want to do.
She saw something in you. She saw a spark.
She did, Mrs. Turk.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I had a counselor in high school. Oh my gosh, that woman, she believed in me so much.
Yeah.
Mrs. Core. This woman, my mother was a single parent, so Mrs. Core would step in and drive me all over. I was a future teacher, and I was a president of the Future Teachers Association, and my job was to set up chapters of Future Teachers Associations in the rural areas of northeastern Oklahoma. And this woman literally would step out of being a counselor at school to drive me to these other schools to set up these chapters throughout the school year. Yeah. So teachers are amazing. You know, it really is amazing how they can influence us in ways that you might not even imagine, or while it's happening, how important that was.
Yeah, you don't always appreciate it at the time, and sometimes, you know, it can plant a seed that doesn't always grow immediately, but the seed is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Russell, I have to talk about this. You were raised Southern Baptist. How did your parents take the path that you took as far as writing Bizarro, you know, horror, and plus also being in the rock or the bands that you were in? What did they think?
Oh, well, going back to when I was, I guess about in elementary school, I asked them repeatedly to get me a guitar, and they never would. And I finally got one in the 6th grade. I think they were just tired of hearing about it.
Yeah.
And then I was making all kinds of racket, and immediately formed a band as soon as I could play 2 chords. And then they didn't really say much about it, and then they would complain occasionally, but I just kept playing. And then my interest in, you know, the darker fiction and art grew, and I remember I had a King Diamond cassette, and he's one of my favorite heavy metal artists, and I was reading the liner notes, and there was this incredible illustration from one of the scenes in one of the songs from the album, and I told my mom I wanted to draw it as a mural on my wall, and she was like, oh no, you don't want to do that. That's so dark, it's so cemetery. And then, so it was always talk like that, and they were like, and it kind of escalated in high school. They did the classic thing, and they were like, oh, being an artist is not a real career, you won't make any money.
Right.
So they discouraged me in that
sure
way.
They did.
And then I stopped going to church when I was 18, and they didn't really say much about that, and I don't know, a lot of times in our family we just don't really verbalize our feelings that well, and so I don't know what they really thought, you know, but they seemed to like be proud of some of my accomplishments, like if our band was on the radio, or, you know, but then there was always the criticism that followed, like, oh, he's off key there, or what's this, it's noise, or blah blah blah. And then as far as the writing goes, they still haven't read any of it. My mom used to say, like, in the past, she used to say, I always thought it was hilarious. She would say, why can't you do something that's uplifting to the human spirit?
Yes.
And like, that just cracked me up. I mean, she's a real sweetheart, but like, I don't know, like, they just think it's off-putting, I guess, and like, you know, they're like, they've thrown away pieces of my artwork before, and I just think they were kind of offended, at least to some extent. But lately, though, they've been far more supportive than they ever have before.
Oh, good.
Although they haven't read anything yet. My wife has My mom asked me once if I would send her copies, and my wife said, "Oh, you don't want to read that. You don't want to read it."
Yeah.
And,
She feared for you.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe incest and necrophilia will be offensive to them. I don't know. But there's not that much of it in here. Just, I don't know. I think a lot of the stuff in my books also have a lot of dark humor, so they might appreciate that. But
Don't chance it.
right. I don't know, but I want them to read it though. The last time I hung out with my parents, I told my mom I did want her to read my stuff, especially Lucifer, my first full length. But I do blogs, and my mom likes my blog posts, even though they've been some of them have been filled with profanity and negative sentiments. But the newer ones, I don't think they have as much profanity. But
Yeah.
they're way more encouraging now than they were before. I think they actually believe I'm getting somewhere with this. And I had one more comment about teachers, just as an aside, is that I never considered even trying to get published until my English 101 college professor back in 2011 when I went back to school. She said that she thought I was really talented. And at the time, I was going to major in television production. And she said, "Why don't you consider writing?" And then so I did. And then I did NaNoWriMo and blah, blah, blah. And I just wanted to mention that.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
very nice.
Yeah, like you said, Sharon, it was hugely, made a big impact.
Yeah.
It's very encouraging.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the thing with my parents.
Well, and it is interesting how we all take different turns in life. I ended up not being a teacher, and my life took a different path. But I'm quite happy with the way it went. Never thought I was going to be a radio host. But, it is interesting how life takes us in various directions. And I always say, do what you feel comfortable with, Don't let people pigeonhole you. Because too many times parents direct you in what they want you to do. And we just had a young lady on who's 13, and I love that her father is kind of letting her do what she wants.
He's very supportive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she is a writer. She's written 3 children's stories. She's
Two children's stories.
Well, yeah, and one young adult.
And one young adult.
Yeah, and then she's also a singer-songwriter, and she's starting to get into acting. And her parents they're not objective to it. As long as she gets her degree, he says, the only thing I'm going to ask is, I don't care what you do as long as you finish and get your degree.
Yeah.
And whatever you want.
Yeah.
So, you need that encouragement.
Yes.
I know that I was raised Free Will Baptist. It's a lot different than what you were raised. And it is important to understand that our religion sometimes can direct us as far as, the way we think or the direction in which we go, because it did me, without a doubt. And what I like is that I'm one of those adventurous types, and I went out there, and I don't know why. I was always curious about religion. So I literally went to various churches growing up because I wanted to see what they were all about. I wanted to see what each one was different. And I have to tell you, Sharon, I experienced my first Seder last year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And you know what? I was scared to death. Because I was, because it was family. And so the family did one first at home. And they made it so much fun. That night was so much fun. But then the next day we were going to one that was 60 people.
Oh, yes.
And I was praying, please don't make me read. And guess what? I had to read. And I didn't know how to pronounce a lot of the words. But that was okay. But I have to tell you something funny, Sharon, and most people who are Jewish thought this was funny. But what happened is that everyone that was there was pretty well open to anything, because it wasn't just Jewish people there. There were a lot of people who were invited there who weren't Jewish to the Seder.
Right.
And
that's because it's more common. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're just reading, about the whole story of Moses and everything. But anyway, the thing is that what happened is there was 2 gentlemen behind me who were elderly. And they did not find my reading comical, that I was pronouncing the words long. But it kind of was funny because it's quiet when you're reading because everyone's listening to you.
Yes.
but I'm not going to use profanity, but they did say that dumb blah blah blah. And it was kind of funny because they were serious. It's like, he's got to take this more serious. He's got to pronounce these words right. Yeah. But in the context of 60 people being there, it was kind of funny, because I wasn't the only one who read the names wrong. So, but anyway, it's fun for me to experience different religions, as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And it actually does help me as an author. Because one of the things I always said, too, as an author, is traveling is one of the best educations you can get.
Yes.
I'm sure that, Russell, you probably have traveled with your band.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, I can almost bet you that you've traveled, Sharon.
I have. I've traveled a great deal.
Yeah.
Yes.
And one of the things that I've discovered is that when you travel, you're not just writing about something you've read somewhere. You actually get to write about your experiences.
Yes,
so
yes.
when you're writing about a scene or something, that's something you probably experienced.
Often it is, or often it's related to something you've experienced.
Yeah.
So it might not be the exact same thing, but it may be something similar. It's true. You draw on experiences, even though they might not be identical.
Right. So
there's one thing I find that I think, talking about traveling, in a related sense, I think a lot of writers share one trait, and that is curiosity.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think most writers are curious about other people and about other communities, other places.
Right.
And they love collecting stories.
Yeah.
And they love hearing about what makes people tick. And I find that that's something that most writers share. And if they don't have that, I find it surprising because I think it's just so essential and elementary.
You almost couldn't be a writer without doing that, because how can you, if you just wrote one mundane thing after another to where it's just blah, 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 no one's going to be interested. They want to see, different dimensions of something, whether it's a character or a surrounding or interactions with other characters. You almost have to have some experience in that.
That's right. And how do you get into a character's head?
Right.
How do you enter into another person's mind? It's through, I think, curiosity about what makes another person think the way they do and behave the way they do. And, if you're not curious, then you probably wouldn't have a real feel for that.
Right. And I find also, Sharon, when I helped someone who translate a book from one language, from Arabic into English, from someone who was from the Middle East. And what I found is I didn't know anything about the Middle East. I knew nothing about the Middle East until I helped with this book. And, it's kind of interesting how you find out about different religions and different people and different interactions he was from Beirut. And I just assumed I knew everything about Beirut from watching the news. And the thing is, I knew nothing.
Right.
So, and I knew nothing about his spirituality and what he believed in. And so it's good to get to know different people. It's good to have different experiences in travel. And like you said, and once you meet someone, you can almost create a character out of someone you've met. And Russell, I know you do that. That's quite obvious from the things I can see here that you've written. So you definitely have a good imagination.
Thank you.
Now, you wrote Lucifer. What is that about exactly? Because it's Lucy. It's actually Lucy. Fur is the title.
Yes. Hold on a second.
I think he's getting the book.
Oh, yeah. It's the book.
Okay.
Cover.
Uh-huh.
This is my little kitty, Lucifer. That was her nickname, and she lived with me for 8 years before she passed away.
Oh.
And so she inspired the book, and I wanted to make it. One night, I thought it would be really funny to have a basic slasher movie, and instead of a Jason or a Freddy or a human, you have a house cat with supernatural powers. And so that was the genesis of the idea. And then
What an
Like,
idea.
so it's basically, it follows the, traditional slasher structure. You have 6 teenagers, and they all get killed one by one. And but in the book, there's a family, there's a couple, and the wife's father lives with the couple, and Lucifer is the cat, the house cat, and the cat. Something horrible. This group of teenagers commits a horrible crime against the cat, and then it unfolds from there, and it just gets worse and worse. And it's kind of like, I guess, the cat becomes a metaphor for nature, for like an indiscriminate force, you know. But then there's also elements, of course, she's kind of like an avenging angel or something, and there are always a lot of different stuff. There's like a strong religious theme, and it's set in a dystopian world, which is called Mabel Town, which is a fictionalized version based on Mableton, where we live.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's sort of like Stephen King's Castle Rock or Derry, Maine, or something. It's more like
Pet Sematary.
Sunnydale from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so it's controlled by a religious government, and that plays into the story. So, but that's what it's about, basically.
All right. Do you write similar you have you seen Evil Dead?
Oh yes.
Evil Dead was a spoof. It started out as a spoof. They tried one that was serious and it didn't go over very well, so they went back to the spoof part of it. But that it's very comical, and I'm going to be honest with you, I was never into that kind of either movies or books or anything like that until I used to have a show called Behind the Scenes, and I had to interview people from the play Evil Dead, which taught me a lesson because I thought I knew from the title what it was about. That play was so funny. I mean, I know it had its gruesome parts, but it really was funny. And sometimes, we have to open our minds to different genres to really get an understanding of what someone's trying to convey or say in a book or a play. So, so I actually enjoyed it. It was very funny.
Ooh. Yeah, so. I feel that my stuff tends to go in that direction naturally. If I just like let go and let things flow, it's just what happens. That's where I'm most comfortable, and I think my voice is forming and taking me more and more in that direction. And I love absurdist humor. I love it. Like, I love Airplane and The Jerk, those movies.
Yes.
And Strange Brew. Those were things I loved as a kid. And I love that kind of stuff. And I love Evil Dead Part 2.
Yeah.
Or and 2 and 3 are just genius. I mean, I love Part 1 as well. But I just love that kind of stuff.
Well, we're running out of time. We're actually down to the last minute of the show. So I would like to ask you, Sharon, it's Sharon Hart-Green, and Sharon wrote Come Back For Me, and then also Not a Simple Story. So Sharon, where can we learn more about your book and yourself?
Well, my books are available in bookstores. I mean, more commonly in Canada, but they're starting to be stocked in the United States. But the easiest thing is to find the book online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. And I have a website. It's SharonHartGreen.com. And I've been speaking in the United States as well as in Canada. And I'm speaking appearances for the fall. So you never know. I might end up being in a
Las
city
Vegas.
Close to you. You never know.
That would be fun.
And I want to make sure people understand the spelling. It's Sharon Hart-Green. It's SharonHartGreen.
And there's a hyphen. There's a hyphen between Hart and Green.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Even in the website, though?
Yes.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
no.
No.
Sharon is all one word.
Yeah, Sharon Hart-Green,
Oh.
all one word on the website, SharonHartGreen.com, because they can
Yes.
click on there and they can find everything about you there, because I know I
Absolutely.
did.
Having events and the endorsements for my book and bio, synopsis, all of that. And also, I'm going to be uploading a reader's guide because my book is starting to be used in schools.
Oh, wow.
So there has been a request for a reader's guide. So I'm going to. I've already done it. I just haven't uploaded it yet.
Okay. And Russell, where can we learn more about you?
Well, I have an Amazon authors page, and so you just go to Amazon and look up Russell Holbrook, spelled just like it sounds, RussellHolbrook. And I'm also on Facebook, and I have a WordPress blog. It's called Secret Friends of Tuesday, and that's it for now. But yeah,
All right.
check me out on Facebook and get in touch. And
I'm sure we're going to hear more about
Very
you in the
cool.
future.
Yes. Yep.
And we're hoping that we will see Sharon our way. If you're ever in this way, either one of you, please, we'll have you in the studio.
Russell, where are you at? Because I don't think I heard.
Close to Atlanta.
I'm in Mableton, Georgia, which is at the northwest corner of Atlanta, just right outside the perimeter.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, used to be a little community, but not so much anymore, huh?
Nope, it is growing like crazy right now,
Yeah.
especially since the explosion of the film industry here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I would like to thank our guests, Sharon Hart-Green and Russell Holbrook, along with my co-host, Janet Corsi. And I'm going to say until next time, this is your host, James Kelly, saying, if you can dream it, you can write it. Thank you both very much for being on the show.
On.
Thank
Thank
you.
Great
Thank
to
you.
meet you.